The world was alive with two great contrasts. To the seas, it was an age of abundance, a frenzy of motion, shimmering fins, armored shells, and creatures with strange alien forms. The Cambrian had ignited a spark that burned across every reef, every shallow tide, every open ocean current. To gaze into those waters was to witness life in full bloom, dazzling and diverse. But if one turned their back to the sea and looked inland, a different picture unfolded. The land, stretching far beyond the tide's reach, was a canvas of silence and stone. Imagine standing on such a shore. Behind you, the ocean churns, its surface broken by waves and the fleeting shadows of fish darting beneath the sunlit shallows. Strange, trilobite eyes glitter as they scuttle across tidal flats. Coral-like structures dot the near shore, each brimming with marine life. And yet, as you step away from the salty spray, the world shifts. The noise of the ocean fades. The air still grows. Before you, the land extends as an empty vastness. Ridges of rock, rolling plains of sand, fractured cliffs and valleys carved by rivers that trickle sluggishly across the landscape. There are no forests to break the horizon, no meadows waving with grass, no canopy of leaves. It is a wilderness of silence, a realm waiting to be transformed. Yet if you look closely, not from above, not at the grand scale of mountains and rivers, but down low, kneeling at the level of stone, something small is stirring. In the cracks where water lingers, in the damp shade of riverbanks, in the subtle creases of rocks kissed by spray, an invisible pioneer has arrived. It is not a towering tree, nor a scurrying insect, nor a crawling amphibian. No, it is something more elusive, more patient, more hidden. It is the fungi. Not the mushrooms you and I know today, those fleeting fruiting bodies that burst briefly from forest soil. The Paleozoic fungi were different, stranger, less familiar, yet their essence was the same. Networks of filaments, fine as mist and strong as steel, spreading outward in quiet persistence. These filaments, called hyphae, crept into every crevice they could find, weaving threads beneath the surface, like delicate hands exploring the land grain by grain. Alone, a strand was fragile. Together, they formed vast mats, hidden tapestries spreading across stone, waiting, working, whispering into the earth. They did not march boldly onto the land. They crept, they lingered, they endured. While other organisms relied on the sun, on speed, or on the sea, fungi relied on patience. They were explorers in shadows, engineers of the unseen. In silence, they dissolved minerals from rock, unlocked nutrients, and stitched the barren surface with threads of life. In places too harsh for plants, fungi thrived. In places where no animal could find footing, fungi settled. They were not conquerors, they were caretakers, quietly preparing the land for the multitudes that would follow. Pause for a moment and reflect on this. Before the lush Carboniferous swamps, before insects buzzed among ferns, before amphibians crawled out of the rivers, there were fungi. Imagine Earth without the green of forests, without the rustle of leaves or the hum of wings. The land was bare, but beneath that bareness, fungi were already at work. Without them, the soil that would nourish forests could not form. Without them, the alliances that plants would rely upon could not exist. Without them, decay would not recycle, and life would suffocate under the weight of its own abundance. Fungi were not a side note in history, they were the prologue. And yet, because they were quiet, they are so often overlooked. Even today, most of us think of fungi only when we see mushrooms sprouting after rain, or mold blooming on forgotten bread, or yeast turning sugar into bread and beer. But those are only the surface expressions of something deeper, older, more immense. The true body of fungi, the mycelium, is hidden. It is a living web beneath our feet, a whispering network that holds forests together, that binds ecosystems, that recycles death into life. In modern soil, in a handful of earth, miles upon miles of fungal threads lie coiled. They do not cry for attention, they do not boast, they endure. So it was in the Paleozoic. As fish filled the seas and trilobites scuttled across the sands, fungi stretched across the rocks. As primitive plants tried their first tentative steps onto land, fungi met them with open arms, trading nutrients for sugars, weaving together partnerships that would last for hundreds of millions of years. As cycles of life and death began, fungi became the silent custodians, breaking down the fallen, feeding the soil, ensuring balance. They were not visible in the way that trilobites were, or ammonites, or armored fish. They left few fossils, for their bodies were too delicate to endure the ages, but their presence was undeniable. Their influence spread like the webs they wove, quiet, invisible, foundational. Without fungi, the forests could not have risen. Without fungi, the coal deposits of later ages would not have formed. Without fungi, the entire symphony of terrestrial life would have stumbled before it began. And here in this silence, their story begins. A story not of grandeur, but of persistence, not of conquest, but of care, not of fleeting brilliance, but of eternal patience. The seas had their explosions of life, dazzling and loud. The land belonged first to the whisperers, the weavers, the fungi. So let us journey into this hidden world. Let us set aside the thunder of oceans and the glitter of fish. Let us kneel by the shorelines, lean close to the cracks in stone, and follow the threads as they stretch through the unseen. This is their tale, the tale of the hidden architects, the silent gardeners, the keepers of decay and renewal. This is the story of fungi, the quiet forces that made Earth a home. The sea has always been Earth's first home, but in the Paleozoic, it held a special kind of majesty. Imagine standing on a stretch of coast over 400 million years ago. The horizon is vast, the sun pale and slightly dimmer than today, its light scattered through an atmosphere still finding its balance. Behind you, the ocean teems with life. Strange trilobites crawl along the seabed, their jointed legs leaving tracks across rippled sands. Primitive fish dart through the shallows, scales glinting like coins in the shifting water. The waves murmur endlessly, as they have for billions of years. But turn your back to that sea, and the world changes. The noise fades away, the rich tapestry of color and motion disappears. Before you lies a land almost alien, vast plains of bare rock, ridges worn down by endless winds, scattered pools of water gathering where rain has trickled from the sky. There are no forests here, no birdsong, no grass bending with the wind. The air is silent except for the rustle of air itself. It is a place of solitude, a place of potential, and a place that feels lonely, as though waiting for someone to arrive. The first impression is emptiness. The ground is gray and lifeless, broken only by streaks of mineral color, red where iron has bled into the stone, pale whites where salts have crystallized under the sun. The rivers cut their channels through rock, carrying grit and sand but almost no life. There are no trees to shade their banks, no insects to hum over their waters, no amphibians to croak in hidden pools. Only wind and stone, water and silence. Yet if you linger long enough, if you kneel and let your eyes adjust to the small scale of this world, you begin to notice details. Here, where the river leaves a damp edge, something clings to the surface. A faint green smear of algae, a primitive pioneer testing its luck on the land. And interwoven among that algae, quieter still, is something more subtle, thin, white strands barely visible against the stone. They are not plants, they are not animals. They are something else entirely, fungal threads, mycelium, spreading patiently through cracks where moisture lingers. These shores were lonely, but they were not empty. They were being explored by the quietest of architects. Fungi were perfectly suited to this in-between world. Unlike plants, they did not need sunlight to thrive. Unlike animals, they did not need to move or hunt. Instead, they reached into stone itself, unlocking minerals, feeding on the simplest bits of organic matter carried from the sea. Where water touched rock, fungi followed. Where shade gathered in cracks, fungi spread. They were invisible wanderers across the landscape, leaving no towering shapes, no dramatic movements, only the hidden lace of their patient growth. Think of it this way: the seas were noisy, full of spectacle and drama. The land was quiet, contemplative, and fungi were its first caretakers. They worked in silence, preparing the land grain by grain, softening its edges, beginning the long process of turning barren rock into soil. Every whisper of their presence was a promise that this lonely land would not remain empty forever. But in these early days, loneliness was real. The Earth's surface was harsh. By day, the sun scorched, baking the rocks. By night, temperatures dropped sharply, the cold biting into the barren plains. Storms lashed the land, carving gullies and scattering debris, and without plants to anchor the soil, rains often tore away whatever fragile beginnings clung to the surface. It was not an easy place to survive, and yet fungi endured. Their threads, tucked away in cracks and under stones, escaped the harshest sun. Their networks, hidden underground or inside rock pores, were shielded from storms. In the face of barrenness, they persisted. Imagine walking across this shoreline, a shoreline before grass, before moss, before roots. You would see stones stretching in every direction, Pools left behind by tides or storms, slick with algae, dotted the ground. The air would carry no birdsong, no insect buzz, only the sound of wind moving across empty terrain. And beneath your feet, beneath that silence, a hidden world would already be spreading, unseen and uncelebrated. It is a cozy thought, isn't it, that even in the loneliest of places, something was always alive, always working, always preparing the way for what was to come. The land may have seemed empty, but the fungi were there. They were the quiet companions of the Paleozoic earth, weaving their threads through the lonely shores, turning silence into possibility. For millions of years, this would be their kingdom, not flashy, not grand, but essential. They turned barren wastelands into the beginnings of fertile ground. They transformed solitude into opportunity, and from those lonely shores, life's story on land would begin to unfold. If you were to crouch down on one of those barren Paleozoic shorelines and run your hand across the rock, it would feel cold, unyielding, eternal. Stone has always seemed immovable to us, a thing outside the reach of life, but even stone, in time, yields to persistence. And it was fungi, delicate, unassuming fungi, that first began to prove this truth. Beneath the sun, under the weight of storms, in the cracks left by cooling lava or shifting earth, threads of fungal life crept quietly forward. They were not roots, though they resembled them. They were hyphae, tiny filamentous tendrils capable of extraordinary things. Individually, they were finer than the thinnest hair, but together, woven into vast networks called mycelium, they became an expansive living fabric, capable of changing the very skin of the earth. The mycelium slipped into the smallest crevices, entering places no eye could see. They dissolved tiny fragments of rock, not by force, but by chemistry. A slow trickle of enzymes and acids seeped into the stone, breaking it down molecule by molecule. What seemed immovable was, over centuries, coaxed into surrender. Nutrients were drawn out: phosphorus, potassium, iron, the essential ingredients for life. It is almost poetic to imagine stone, the very bones of the earth, yielding not to hammers or storms, but to threads of softness, to quiet persistence. The fungi did not shatter mountains or carve valleys. Instead, they whispered to the stone, patiently teasing apart its secrets, and in doing so, laid the groundwork for soil. Soil, that quiet, rich substance we so often overlook. Without it, plants cannot thrive, ecosystems cannot flourish, life on land cannot spread. Yet before the great swamps of the Carboniferous, before forests towered, there was no true soil. There was only dust, sand, and rock. It was fungi that first wove dust into something more. Their hyphae created tiny pockets that trapped water, held organic material, and offered shelter for the earliest microbial partners. Slowly, imperceptibly, they began to stitch fertility into a barren world. Picture a single fungal network creeping across a slab of stone by a riverbank. Each filament is thin, nearly invisible, but together they form a mat spreading outward in all directions. Rain falls, seeping through cracks. The hyphae follow, drinking in the dampness, releasing acids that soften the mineral surface. Over time, the rock begins to crumble into fine grains. Algae, clinging nearby, take root in these softened patches. Together, they form the world's first soil horizons, not vast, not deep, but enough to hold promise. If you close your eyes and imagine this moment, it feels almost like a quiet workshop, where unseen artisans are at work. The land is silent, the winds blow, but beneath that silence there is labor happening, thread stitching, stones softening, life preparing. There is comfort in that image, the idea that even when nothing grand seems to be happening, something patient and small is working toward a greater transformation. And this work was not done for glory. Fungi did not raise monuments. They did not tower over landscapes or carve their mark upon the sky. They worked humbly at the level of grains and cracks, but from their work would come the foundations of forests, the spread of plants, the cycles of nutrients that sustain all terrestrial life. Think about the world we live in today. Every forest you've walked through, every meadow you've admired, every garden where plants rise and fall with the seasons, all of them rest on soil. And soil, in its first, earliest form, was gifted to earth by these fungal pioneers. Their threads in the stone were the stitches that bound rock into fertility, silence into growth. Even more remarkable, these early fungi were not working alone. Within their filaments, they carried the possibility of partnership. Already they were reaching toward algae, toward the green organisms that produced sugars from the sun. By dissolving stone, fungi gained minerals. By joining with algae, they could trade these minerals for energy. Together, they would create lichens, some of the oldest surviving alliances on Earth. And it all began here, with fungi threading through the stone, patiently preparing the stage. Imagine a world without this beginning. If fungi had not softened stone, if they had not created soil, if they had not forged these alliances, plants might never have spread. Without plants, forests could not have risen. Without forests, oxygen levels might never have surged high enough to sustain vast animal life. The very breath in our lungs, in a sense, can be traced back to those quiet filaments creeping into rock. There is something profoundly cozy in knowing this, that the great dramas of evolution, the rise of fish, the spread of amphibians, the reign of dinosaurs, even our own story, rest upon the patient, unseen work of fungal threads. They did not rush. They did not demand attention. They simply continued endlessly, weaving life from stone. And so, as you picture the lonely shores of the Paleozoic, do not see them as barren wastelands. See them as canvases, being quietly stitched and softened by invisible hands. Every grain of soil that formed was a promise of what would come: forests, insects, animals, and one day us. It all began here, with threads in the stone. When life first stepped hesitantly onto land, it did not arrive in isolation. In nature, survival often depends not on the strength of one, but on the bond of many. And so it was in the Paleozoic, when the first tender experiments in terrestrial living unfolded. The secret was not dominance, nor conquest, but partnership. Imagine again the lonely shoreline, where bare rock met the restless sea. The air was thin, the soil barely forming, the conditions harsh and unforgiving. Algae, those small green pioneers, crept cautiously from the water's edge, drawn upward by sunlight and opportunity. They could capture energy from the sun, weaving sugars out of air and light. But on this land of stone, their weakness was clear. They lacked the means to anchor themselves deeply, and they could not easily unlock the minerals their fragile bodies required. Their green promise risked withering in a world too barren to sustain them. And yet in the very cracks they touched, there lived another form of life, fungi, patient and persistent, already threading their way into stone. They could dissolve rock, harvest minerals, and weave stability in places where none existed. But unlike algae, fungi could not conjure energy from the sun. They hungered for sugars, for the energy that green life could provide. Alone, each faced limits. Together, they found possibilities. This was the birth of lichens, a partnership between fungus and alga, or sometimes cyanobacteria, a union that was more than the sum of its parts. The fungus offered structure, shelter, and minerals. The alga offered energy, the gift of sunlight captured and transformed into nourishment. Together, they became something new, something capable of thriving where neither could alone. Picture a lichen growing on a rock face millions of years ago. To the eye, it is simple, a faint patch of green or gray spreading slowly across the stone. But within that patch lies a miracle of cooperation. Each fungal thread wraps around algal cells, cradling them, protecting them from desiccation, while in return receiving sugars made by sunlight. Slowly, steadily, the lichen expands, sending out spores, colonizing new patches of rock. From such humble beginnings, entire landscapes are softened and prepared. There is a kind of cozy poetry in this. Two very different lives, one that cannot make food and one that cannot hold onto minerals, find each other in the cracks of stone. Neither dominates the other, neither survives without the other. Together, they stitch a foothold for life on land. And the partnerships did not stop there. In time, fungi reached out to the earliest land plants as well. These were not trees or ferns yet, but tiny, moss-like pioneers, fragile and small. Their roots were shallow, their reach limited. Alone, they might have faltered, but fungi wrapped their filaments around these primitive roots, forming the first mycorrhizal partnerships. The fungi reached deep into the soil, pulling up phosphorus, nitrogen, and other minerals. They handed these nutrients to the plant. In return, the plant shared sugars, sending energy downward into the fungal threads. It was a quiet exchange, unseen and unspoken, but it would become one of the most important relationships in the history of Earth. Even today, hundreds of millions of years later, Over 90% of land plants depend on fungi in this way. Every forest, every meadow, every garden is supported by these hidden alliances. Trees stand tall because of what happens underground in the unseen world of roots and mycelium. This partnership began here in the early Paleozoic as one of life's most enduring and transformative symbioses. Think of the comfort in that. In a world of uncertainty, where survival seemed precarious, life did not succeed by standing alone, but by reaching outward, by forming bonds. Fungi and algae, fungi and plants, these connections were acts of trust that shaped the destiny of the earth. It reminds us that strength is not always about independence. Sometimes it is about interdependence, about finding what we lack in the gifts of another and offering our own in return. The lonely shores, once barren, began to change. Where lichens spread, stones softened. Where plant-fungi alliances formed, soil deepened. Patches of green appeared, clinging more firmly to the ground, spreading across valleys and riverbanks. Slowly, the land began to breathe with new life. What had once been silent wastelands grew faint carpets of color. Imagine walking along those Paleozoic rocks as they changed. At first, only faint streaks of green cling stubbornly to the stone. Then, as the centuries pass, larger patches form, lichens, moss-like plants and fungal mats spreading outward. The surface feels different underfoot, softer, richer, alive. The silence is no longer quite so empty, for in that silence, life is whispering its first words on land. This was the quiet revolution of fungi, not in their strength alone, but in their willingness to partner. They became facilitators, connectors, the hidden threads that bound together the green promise of plants and the mineral wealth of earth. In this, they set in motion everything that would follow: forests, insects, amphibians, the grand march of life on land. And so the symbiosis of possibility took root. What had once been a barren world of stone was becoming something else, something fertile, something alive. The promise of future ages lay hidden in these partnerships, patient and enduring. The land was no longer a lonely expanse, it was becoming a home. The land, once silent, was beginning to stir. With lichens clinging stubbornly to rocks, with thin mats of soil forming in patches, a new kind of pioneer had arrived: plants. They were not yet towering trees or fern-filled swamps. They were small, moss-like forms, fragile in appearance, humble in stature. But these early green allies were the first breath of forests to come, the living promise of Earth's land awakening. Picture them, tiny stalks no more than a few centimeters tall, reaching tentatively upward, their delicate fronds catching the sun. They grew in small colonies along riverbanks and in damp valleys where water trickled and pooled. Their roots were shallow, barely anchoring them to the soil. Alone, they could not have thrived. The land was still a harsh place, the sun unshielded, the soil thin and mineral-poor, the winds dry and relentless. Without help, these first plants might have faltered and vanished, their green promise extinguished. But they were not alone. Waiting beneath them, wrapping gently around their roots, fungi reached upward. These hidden weavers offered the plants what they lacked: access to nutrients. With their hyphae threading deeply into soil and stone, fungi could pull phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace minerals from places roots could not reach. They passed these gifts into the fragile green bodies above, strengthening them, helping them endure. In return, the plants shared their sugars, energy spun from sunlight, stored within their cells, passed downward into fungal threads. This was the beginning of one of the most enduring friendships in Earth's history, the mycorrhizal partnership between fungi and plants. A quiet trade agreement, sealed not with words, but with molecules, carried out not in grand spectacle, but in intimate exchanges beneath the soil. Imagine kneeling by a Paleozoic stream and peering closely into the moss-like patches that clung to the damp ground. What you would see above was modest, a carpet of green fronds swaying in the wind. But what you could not see was far grander. Below, an underground network of fungal threads stretched outward in all directions, weaving through grains of soil, slipping into pores of rock, forming a living tapestry that connected each tiny plant. Through this network, nutrients flowed, like letters carried in a silent mail system. Plants gave what they had in abundance, sugars. Fungi returned with what they could gather, minerals. Each gave what the other lacked. Together, they survived where neither could alone. It is a cozy thought, isn't it? That life's great expansion onto land began not with competition, but with cooperation. The first green allies and their fungal partners remind us that strength often lies in connection, in relationships quietly woven out of trust and exchange. The effects of this partnership spread outward. With fungi's help, plants grew sturdier, their colonies expanding along the banks of rivers and across damp plains. The soil beneath them thickened as roots and hyphae bound it together, preventing it from washing away in storms. Over centuries, the land changed. What had once been bare rock and dust now bore patches of living green, held steady by fungal threads below. As these green allies spread, they brought more than beauty to the land. They changed the atmosphere itself. Through photosynthesis, they pulled in carbon dioxide and released oxygen. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the air grew richer, more hospitable for future generations of life. And again, fungi were there at the heart of it, supporting plants, enabling their spread, ensuring their survival. Imagine how this landscape must have felt. Once barren, now dotted with small colonies of life. Green cushions along riverbanks, mossy carpets spreading across rocky ground, lichens painting cliffs in gray and green. The wind still swept freely, but it carried new scents, the earthy freshness of damp moss, the subtle presence of living soil. The silence was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of beginnings, of a world slowly waking up. And beneath it all, fungi worked without recognition. They did not reach toward the sun like plants, nor swim like fish, nor scuttle like trilobites. They remained unseen, their filaments hidden in soil and stone. Yet without them, the green allies could not have flourished. Without them, the land would not have softened, the atmosphere would not have shifted, and the future forests would not have taken root. We might think of them as hosts, welcoming the first plants into a land that was not yet ready. They prepared the ground, offered stability, and gave nourishment. The plants, in return, opened the door to the sky, capturing sunlight and weaving energy into the fabric of the earth. Together, they created the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems. Even now, hundreds of millions of years later, that alliance endures. Every blade of grass, every tree, every fern carries within its roots the invisible touch of fungi. They are still there, still trading minerals for sugars, still weaving hidden networks that sustain the visible green world. The forests we know today, full of birdsong, alive with color, still rest on the shoulders of that ancient friendship. And it all began here, on lonely Paleozoic shores, where the first green allies leaned on fungi to survive. From this quiet partnership grew the great story of life on land, a story of connection, resilience, and shared possibility. The earth had long known stone. Mountains rose and crumbled, rivers carved valleys, and volcanic fire hardened into basalt and granite. But stone alone could not nurture the green promise of plants, nor sustain the teeming variety of life to come. For that, something new was needed, a cradle, soft and nourishing, to hold the fragile beginnings of ecosystems. This cradle was soil, and it was fungi who first began to weave it into existence. Picture the Paleozoic landscape again. Bare ridges stretch into the distance, cliffs gleam with the colors of minerals, and riverbanks shimmer with wet stone. Now imagine crouching close, pressing your palm against the damp ground where water gathers. Beneath your hand, unseen threads of fungal mycelium are at work. They slip into the cracks, dissolve the rock, and bind grains of dust together. They hold moisture, capture fragments of organic matter, and create tiny sheltered spaces where microbes, algae, and plants can grow. Piece by piece, grain by grain, they transform stone into soil. Soil, it is such an ordinary word today. We walk on it, plant gardens in it, brush it from our clothes without thought. But soil is not simply dirt. It is a living matrix, a mixture of minerals, organic matter, water, air, and life. And in the early Paleozoic, this miracle of substance was new. Without fungi, the land would have remained dust and stone. With fungi, it became a cradle where life could root itself and expand. The process was slow, achingly slow by human standards. Imagine centuries passing as fungal threads extended across a single rocky outcrop, dissolving grains of mineral, binding them with tiny fragments of organic residue left by algae or lichens. Millennia more passed before these thin layers thickened into soil horizons, strata capable of holding moisture through drought, of supporting mosses and protoplants through storms. In human time, it seems impossibly slow. But in Earth's time, it was a steady rhythm, patient and inevitable. Think of the coziness in that slowness, the quiet reassurance that life does not need haste to change the world. The fungi simply persisted, weaving and reweaving, never rushing, never stopping. Every grain softened was a step forward. Every thread of mycelium was a promise that the barren land would one day teem with forests. And this soil was more than simple ground. It was a nursery. Tiny plants, once too fragile to stand alone, found shelter in the fungal-made matrix. Their roots, shallow and weak, were steadied by the threads that cradled them. Moisture lingered longer in the soil, giving them water even when the sun scorched the surface. Nutrients gathered in these fertile patches, feeding their fragile bodies. The fungi were not simply breaking down stone, they were preparing a nursery for Earth's future. Imagine walking across one of these early cradles of soil. To the casual glance, it looks like nothing more than a darkened patch on the ground, softer than the stone around it, perhaps speckled with tiny green shoots. But kneel closer, and you would see that this is no ordinary patch. It is alive, humming silently with networks of fungal threads. Within it, nutrients shift, water flows, and invisible partnerships thrive. It is a hidden city, a living fabric, cradling the earliest terrestrial ecosystems. This cradle would grow to become the very foundation of forests. Every towering tree that would one day rise in the Carboniferous swamps, every fern that would spread across damp valleys, every root that would anchor into the earth, all of them would rest in soil. And soil, in turn, would rest on the work of fungi, the first artisans of fertility. Even now, if you walk into a forest and dig your fingers into the earth, you are touching their legacy. The smell of rich soil, damp and alive, is the breath of countless fungal threads. The softness of soil beneath your feet, the richness that feeds roots and seeds, all of it is the quiet gift of fungi. What began in the Paleozoic as the first thin cradles of soil has endured, layer upon layer, for hundreds of millions of years. There is something deeply comforting in this thought. The ground we walk on does not just matter, it is a memory. It remembers the patient labor of fungi, the partnerships of plants, the slow transformation of stone into sustenance. It holds the history of life's expansion onto land. And in every grain, there remains a whisper of those first cradles, the humble beginnings that made everything else possible. So let us pause in gratitude for this hidden labor, for the fungi that turned dust into soil, barrenness into possibility, silence into growth. The cradles they wove still support us today. We eat because soil holds crops. We breathe because soil holds forests. We live because soil cradles life. And soil, in its very first form, was the patient gift of fungi. Before the towering canopies, before the swamps of tree ferns and giant lycophytes, the land was draped in something quieter, humbler, a world of living carpets. To us, the word forest conjures an image of trunks and branches, of shade beneath leaves, of birdsong carried through canopies. But in the early Paleozoic, no such world yet existed. Instead, the first forests were hidden, not in wood or leaf, but in the mats of fungi and their small green companions. Imagine walking across such a landscape. There are no towering silhouettes on the horizon, no groves of trees swaying in the wind. The land stretches open, wide and bare. And yet, as you look down, you begin to notice the ground itself is alive. Along river valleys, across damp plains, even creeping up the sides of cliffs, thin mats of moss-like plants sprawl outward, anchored and fed by fungal threads beneath them. These mats are no taller than your ankle, some perhaps no higher than your knee, yet they stretch for miles, rolling like green quilts across the stone. From above, they must have looked like strange, sprawling patches of color, irregular oases in a landscape still dominated by grays and browns. From within, at ground level, the view was more intimate. You would see cushions of green fronds rising like miniature forests, their delicate stalks supported and nourished by the fungi below. Between them, damp soil rich with fungal mycelium glistened after rain, holding water in tiny cradles for days. Spores and seeds nestled in these microenvironments, finding shelter from the harsh sun. The fungi themselves worked tirelessly beneath this living quilt. Their hyphae spread outward, binding the mats together, linking plant to plant, sharing nutrients where one was strong and another was weak. They stitched the land into cohesion. Alone, the plants might have faltered, but woven together by fungal threads, they thrived. It was as if the fungi had become the loom, and the plants the fibers, weaving Earth's first terrestrial fabric. These were not forests in the way we know them, but they were forests in spirit, communities of life, anchored, nourished, and sustained by fungi. They transformed the land from empty stone into something fertile, alive, and interconnected. Now imagine crouching at the edge of one of these carpets, pressing your fingers into the soil. Beneath the green surface, a whole world hummed unseen. Mycelium spreads like a hidden web, passing nutrients, breaking down minerals, recycling the earliest organic debris. Tiny microbial life flourished in these fungal-built shelters, adding their voices to the growing symphony. And above, the green fronds swayed gently in the wind, fragile yet persistent, their existence made possible by the hidden caretakers below. This was a world of subtlety. No grand trunks cast shade, no vast canopies reached for the sun. And yet, the same principles that sustain modern forests were already here. Roots bound to fungi, fungi weaving soil, nutrients cycling in invisible exchanges. Every forest we know today is an echo of these early mats, these proto-forests that blanketed the Paleozoic land. Think of how cozy it must have felt to walk barefoot across one of these mats. Instead of jagged rock beneath your feet, you would feel the softness of living earth. Your steps would sink into damp cushions, releasing the faint, earthy scent of fungi and soil. Around you, spores drifted in the breeze, tiny messengers carrying the promise of new life to distant patches of land. The silence of the landscape would no longer be emptiness, but the quiet breathing of a world just beginning to awaken. And though they were small, these fungal plant mats carried immense significance. They held the soil in place, preventing storms from washing it away. They kept water on the land, slowing its rush back to the sea. They enriched the ground, making it ready for taller plants to one day root themselves more deeply. In their patient, hidden work, they prepared the earth for forests that would eventually tower to the sky. But here, in the early days, they were forests before forests, vast, sprawling communities that stitched the land into life. They were humble, but they were enough. They softened Earth's barren face and gave it color, texture, and the first true sense of belonging. Today, we can still find echoes of this world. Lichens spread across stones in mountain valleys, moss carpets the shaded corners of forests, mycelium hums unseen beneath every step we take. These are the living descendants of that early age, reminders that before trunks and branches, before leaves and shade, there were threads and mats, weaving the first forests across a quiet land. The true canopies would come later, but without these humble beginnings, without the quilts woven by fungi and their green allies, the forests of the future could never have risen. And so we must honor them, these early carpets of life, for they were the ones who first dared to blanket the earth. For millions of years, the land was defined by quietness and modesty. Moss-like plants clung close to the soil, lichens painted stone with faint strokes of green and gray, and fungi threaded invisibly through every crevice. Life was small, subtle, intimate. But in this gentle world of low carpets and spreading mats, something astonishing appeared, something so strange, so out of scale, that for centuries even modern scientists struggled to believe it was real. These were the giants of a hidden world, the towering fungi known as Prototaxites. Imagine the Paleozoic landscape, a land without forests, where the tallest plants rose no higher than your waist. Then picture, rising above this miniature world, vast columns of life stretching 6, even 8 meters into the air. They were massive, pillar-like organisms, their trunks as thick as a human body, their surfaces rough and textured. Against the flat horizon, they loomed like sentinels, silent and otherworldly, scattered across valleys and plains. To early eyes, they must have seemed like monuments, strange, organic towers sprouting from the soil. They had no branches, no leaves, no flowers. Instead, their forms resembled immense logs standing upright, tapering slightly as they reached toward the sky. For centuries, paleontologists debated what they were. Some thought they must be trees, others imagined giant algae, still others speculated they were something entirely new. But closer study revealed their truth. They were fungi, colossal and unique, the largest organisms of their time. Walking among them would have been surreal. You would stride through low mats of moss and early plants, the ground soft beneath your feet with fungal soil. And then, suddenly, you would find yourself standing in the shadow of a Prototaxites, craning your neck to take in its immense height. Its surface would be coarse, its body fibrous, built of layered fungal tissue. Spores drifted from its upper reaches, carried by winds across the land. Around its base, smaller plants clustered, feeding on the enriched soil it created, benefiting from the shade it offered. It is cozy in a way to imagine these great towers not as monsters, but as caretakers. They were the first giants of the land, yet they were not predators, not threats. They were simply there, quiet presences, shaping the environment by existing. Their immense bodies cycled nutrients, stored carbon, and offered new habitats for the small communities of life around them. To tiny arthropods crawling across the mossy ground, Prototaxites must have seemed like an entire world, a mountain of living tissue towering into the sky. The strangeness of their scale cannot be overstated. For hundreds of millions of years, fungi had lived modestly, weaving threads through soil, trading minerals with plants, forming lichens on stone. And then, in this one extraordinary lineage, they reached upward, claiming space no other life-form dared occupy. In a land of ankle-high greenery, Prototaxites stood as giants, as if fungi themselves had dreamed of forests before forests existed. Scientists today believe they may have fed on the organic matter that accumulated in the soil, recycling nutrients on a grand scale. Others suggest they may have formed symbiotic relationships, much like modern fungi do. Whatever their exact lifestyle, their impact was clear. They dominated the land, the tallest living things on Earth for millions of years. There is something awe-inspiring in imagining this world, not the lush forests we often picture when we think of prehistoric times, but quiet plains dotted with fungal towers. Imagine standing on a ridge, gazing across a valley where dozens of Prototaxites rise like stone pillars, their silhouettes etched against the sky. The wind whistles softly, carrying spores through the air. The ground beneath your feet is alive with mycelium, connecting mats of plants and patches of lichens. Around you, life feels both alien and familiar, alien in form, yet familiar in its quiet rhythm of growth and decay. And perhaps there is comfort in this strangeness. These fungal giants remind us that the story of life is not a straight line of progress toward the forms we know today. It is a tapestry of experiments, of shapes and strategies that appear, flourish, and fade. Prototaxites were one such experiment, fleeting on the timescale of Earth, yet monumental in their presence. They were the dream of fungi writ large, towering reminders that even the quietest of life forms can, for a time, take center stage. Though the giants are gone now, their legacy remains. Every forest we know today rests on fungal networks, even if the fungi themselves no longer rise above the canopy. Their role has shifted back underground, but their importance has not diminished. They remain the hidden architects, the caretakers, the quiet ones who sustain. So as we picture these towering fungal columns, let us not see them only as curiosities, but as symbols. They remind us of the power of persistence, of patience, of quiet work done over eons. They remind us that even the humblest threads can weave greatness, sometimes hidden, sometimes towering into the sky. And they remind us that the earth has always been full of surprises, waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. The earth has always breathed. Winds sweep across valleys, storms roll over oceans, volcanoes exhale fire and ash into the sky. But in the Paleozoic, a new kind of breath was added to the planet's rhythm, the subtle, unseen exhalations of fungi. They were not loud like volcanoes, not dramatic like storms. Their breath was quiet, patient, and yet it reshaped the very air that wrapped the world. Imagine the land before plants spread widely, when fungi still ruled the soil and mats of mosses clung only to damp places. On the surface, it seemed barren, silent, still, but beneath that stillness, fungal threads were at work. As they dissolved stone, they released minerals into the soil. As they partnered with algae and early plants, they encouraged photosynthesis. Every grain of rock broken down by fungi, every nutrient freed, contributed to a chain of events that changed the atmosphere above. Think of the cozy image of a forest today after rainfall. The air feels different, moist, rich, earthy. That fragrance we call petrichor, so beloved, so comforting, is largely the breath of fungi. Compounds released by fungal activity rise from the soil, filling the air with their subtle perfume. Now imagine that same effect magnified across millions of years, across vast stretches of Paleozoic land. Slowly, imperceptibly, the fungi exhaled into Earth's lungs, shaping the very air. Their work began with the simplest exchanges. By breaking stone into soil, They created habitats where photosynthetic partners could thrive. Plants, with their chlorophyll, pulled carbon dioxide from the sky and released oxygen in return. But those plants could not have survived without fungi feeding them minerals from the soil. So in a sense, every breath of oxygen released by those early plants carried the hidden signature of fungi. They were the invisible co-authors of the atmosphere. And fungi themselves contributed directly. In their endless cycles of growth and decay, they broke down organic matter, recycling carbon and nitrogen. Their respiration released carbon dioxide back into the air, balancing the drawdown from plants. Without this balance, the atmosphere might have swung wildly, too much carbon removed, and Earth could have frozen, too much released, and the world could have sweltered. Fungi were the regulators, maintaining equilibrium through their quiet cycles. It is a cozy thought that something so small could hold such influence. Each fungal thread, thinner than a hair, was part of a planetary breath. Millions upon millions of threads, working silently together, exhaling and inhaling, releasing and recycling, until the balance was kept. Picture standing on a Paleozoic plain. Around you, mosses cluster near a stream, lichens cling to rock faces, and beneath it all, fungi hum in silence. The air you breathe feels fresher than it did millions of years before, richer in oxygen, lighter in your lungs. That change is not only the gift of plants, but of their fungal partners. Without fungi, the plants could not have spread. Without fungi, their breath of oxygen would have been faint. With fungi, it grew into a steady exhalation that slowly filled the sky. Even the great events of Earth's history, like the rise of vast Carboniferous forests, owe their beginnings to this hidden breath. By preparing the soil, fungi allowed plants to spread. By partnering with roots, they enabled forests to grow taller and denser. By decomposing dead matter, they returned nutrients to the cycle, keeping the forests alive. The fungi were always there, behind the scenes, breathing with the earth. And though they remain unseen, we still feel their breath today. Every time you inhale the scent of damp soil after rain, you are breathing the memory of fungi. Every gust of oxygen in your lungs carries their legacy. They were and are the regulators of life's air. There is something profoundly comforting in that. We are sustained not only by what we see, the green of leaves, the sparkle of oceans, but also by what we do not. Beneath our feet, fungi continue their patient labor, breaking down, recycling, releasing, balancing. Their breath mingles with ours, their work invisible yet indispensable. In the Paleozoic, they taught the world how to breathe anew. They softened stone, nourished plants, and helped fill the skies with oxygen. Their quiet respiration became Earth's lullaby, a steady rhythm carrying life forward. And so, when you step outside after rain and inhale deeply, remember that you are breathing not just air, but history, the breath of fungi, a gift that began long ago when the land was young and the world was learning how to breathe. Every age of Earth has its architects. Mountains are raised by tectonic plates colliding. Rivers carve valleys, shaping the land through endless flow. Winds sculpt dunes, glaciers grind stone. But not all engineers of the Earth work with force or grandeur. Some work in silence, unseen, building foundations grain by grain. Among the earliest and most important of these were the fungi, the silent engineers of the Paleozoic world. Imagine standing on the bank of a young Paleozoic river. The water trickles softly over stones, its banks bare and unstable. With no roots to hold them, the edges collapse easily during storms, sending sand and silt downstream. Floods reshape the channels again and again, carving new paths, sweeping away anything fragile that tries to take hold. To live on such shifting ground is nearly impossible. Yet beneath the surface, fungi have begun their hidden work. Their mycelial threads weave through grains of soil like stitches in cloth. They bind loose particles together, holding moisture and preventing the banks from eroding so quickly. They slip into cracks of stone, dissolving minerals and gluing fragments into something richer, more cohesive. Over time, their networks form a kind of unseen scaffolding beneath the land, giving it resilience against the chaos of storms. This role, unseen yet essential, made fungi some of the first true ecosystem engineers. They reshaped landscapes not by towering above them, but by anchoring them from below. They turned unstable riverbanks into fertile margins where plants could root. They softened rocky valleys into places where soil could hold water long after rains had passed. They created microhabitats, sheltered spaces where small life could flourish. Think of the coziness in this hidden caretaking. The fungi did not demand recognition. They did not stand tall like the Prototaxites, nor wave green fronds like the mosses. They simply worked beneath the surface, ensuring that the land held together, that water lingered, and that nutrients were recycled. Their engineering was quiet but enduring, shaping the earth into a more welcoming home. Picture walking across a Paleozoic floodplain after a storm. The river has swollen and spilled across the land, leaving pools and channels behind. The soil feels damp but not entirely washed away. Beneath your feet, fungal networks are already at work, absorbing the water, binding the ground, stabilizing the land for what will come. Around you, patches of green cling to the edges, moss-like plants supported by their fungal partners. Without the fungi, these plants would have been swept away long ago. With the fungi, they hold fast, growing stronger each season. And their engineering extended beyond soil. Fungi were the first great decomposers, breaking down organic matter that would otherwise have smothered the land. Every fallen frond, every dead organism was carefully dismantled by fungal threads, reduced into nutrients, and returned to the soil. Without this work, debris would have piled up endlessly, choking ecosystems before they could grow. With it, cycles of growth and decay were established, the foundation of every ecosystem since. There is comfort in this cycle. Nothing was wasted, nothing forgotten. Death became food, endings became beginnings. The fungi made sure of it. They were the recyclers, the stabilizers, the silent workers who ensured that life did not stumble under its own weight. Even today, their role as engineers continues. Modern forests would collapse without fungi binding soil, recycling nutrients, and partnering with roots. Our rivers would run muddier, our ecosystems less stable. Yet we rarely see them, rarely think of them, because their work is invisible. They remind us that not all builders are loud. Some build with silence, patience, and persistence. In the Paleozoic, as storms raged and rivers shifted, fungi were already steadying the land. They were the unseen architects, laying down hidden infrastructure so that plants, insects, and amphibians could thrive when their time came. Without their silent engineering, the Earth's surface would have remained fragile, its soil fleeting, its ecosystems unstable. And so, when we look back on those ancient landscapes, we must picture not only the rivers and rocks, but the unseen webs beneath them, the threads binding the land, softening its edges, cradling its beginnings. The fungi were not loud engineers, but they were faithful ones. Their work has lasted for hundreds of millions of years, and it continues beneath our very feet today. Life, no matter how small, always carries within it the promise of an ending. Even in the earliest Paleozoic landscapes, where moss-like plants huddled close to rivers and lichens painted rocky cliffs, death was already part of the story. A frond toppled after a storm, a patch of algae dried in the sun, a fragile arthropod, carried from the sea, perished on the shore. And without someone to tend to these endings, the land would have quickly become choked by remains. And to the fungi, they did not shy away from death, they embraced it. They were the world's first great decomposers, the caretakers of endings. With their networks of hyphae, they slipped into the bodies of the fallen plants, algae, animals, and began the patient work of dismantling them. Molecule by molecule, they took apart what once lived, breaking it down into simple elements: carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. What seemed an end became, in their hands, the beginning of something new. Picture a Paleozoic valley after a storm. Mosses have been uprooted, algae washed ashore, small life lost to the flood. At first, the ground seems littered with debris, but as days pass, fungi begin their hidden work. Their threads spread into the fallen plants, weaving through tissues, releasing enzymes that soften cell walls and break bonds. Slowly, the debris darkens, softens, and disappears into the soil. In its place, nutrients flow outward, enriching the land, feeding new growth. Nothing is wasted, nothing is left to rot in vain. This was the dance with death, a cycle of transformation orchestrated by fungi. To us, decomposition may seem grim, but in truth, it is one of the most beautiful processes on Earth. It is the assurance that endings are not final, that loss can be turned into renewal. In the cozy rhythm of life's story, fungi were the gentle dancers who turned decay into sustenance, silence into fertility. Without them, imagine what the land would have become. Fallen plants would have piled up endlessly, layers of debris smothering the soil. Nutrients would have been locked away, unavailable to new growth. Life would have stagnated under its own weight. The green promise of the Paleozoic might never have blossomed. It was fungi who prevented that, who kept the wheel turning, who ensured that every ending fed a beginning. Even the great forests of later ages depended on this dance. In the Carboniferous, when vast swampy jungles stretched across continents, fungi worked tirelessly to break down fallen trunks and fronds. Some kinds struggled against lignin, the tough substance in wood, which meant much of it was buried and compressed into coal. But even then, fungi were chipping away, preparing for future ages when their descendants would evolve new ways to unlock even the hardest of plant tissues. Always, they were at the heart of recycling, preventing stagnation, ensuring renewal. Think of how cozy it feels to sit by a fire. The warmth of burning would a comfort on a cool night. That warmth, in a way, is a reminder of fungi. The carbon released as flame was once bound in trees, once cycled through soil by fungal decomposers. We inherit their dance with death every time we plant a garden, walk through a forest, or breathe air enriched by plants that fungi helped sustain. On those early Paleozoic shores, the dance was quieter but no less vital. Imagine crouching near a fallen mat of plants, its green faded to brown. You might see nothing but decay. But kneel closer, press your hand to the soil, and you would sense the life within it, fungal threads weaving through, dissolving, recycling, returning. You would realize that death is not an ending, but a passage, a contribution to the living earth. There is comfort in this perspective. We often fear endings, but fungi remind us that endings are part of a larger rhythm, a cozy continuity. They whisper that nothing is lost, only transformed. They show us that even decay has beauty, that even silence has purpose. So let us honor the fungi not only as builders of soil and partners of plants, but as caretakers of death. They danced with decay and turned it into life. They ensured that the Paleozoic world did not drown in its own remains, but instead blossomed into richness. Their dance continues today, beneath every forest floor, in every compost pile, in every breath of rich soil. They remind us that in the grand story of time, every ending is also a beginning. When we imagine ancient Earth, our minds often drift to what we can see: the seas filled with trilobites, the skies waiting for wings, the land dotted with mossy mats, and the towering figures of prototaxites. But the true dominion of the fungi was not in what could be seen. It was in what lay beneath, the hidden, sprawling networks that ruled the underground. Close your eyes and picture the Paleozoic landscape again. The air is still, the land sparse, the tallest plants no higher than your knee. But now sink your imagination below the surface. Peel back the thin layers of soil and stone, and you will find an entire world unfolding. A labyrinth of threads stretches outward in every direction, weaving through grains of earth, linking root to root, stone to soil. This is the fungal kingdom, vast, interconnected, invisible to the eye, but larger than anything above. Each thread or hypha is delicate, finer than the thinnest strand of hair. Yet together, they form mycelium, living networks that can stretch for meters, even kilometers across the ground. In the Paleozoic, these networks stitched together the first true terrestrial ecosystems. A patch of moss here, a cluster of algae there, the fungi linked them, shared nutrients between them, and held the soil beneath them. To step across the land was to tread upon living fabric, a hidden web humming quietly below your feet. There is something cozy, almost magical, in imagining these underground kingdoms. They were like libraries, storing information in chemical exchanges. They were like marketplaces, trading sugars and minerals between partners. They were like cities, with countless tiny corridors through which life pulsed and flowed. And yet, unlike cities, they left no noise, no smoke, no monuments. Their presence was silent, their architecture invisible, but their influence was everywhere. Consider the way they communicated. When one patch of plant grew in a nutrient-rich pocket, fungi could transport minerals from that spot to another patch where plants struggled. In exchange, sugars flowed back the other way. This underground commerce kept the balance, ensuring that life did not simply flare in isolated bursts, but spread evenly across the land. It was not competition alone that shaped ecosystems, but cooperation woven through fungal threads. Imagine standing barefoot on one of those early Paleozoic riverbanks. The ground feels soft beneath you, dark with the richness of decomposed matter. You cannot see it, but beneath your toes, thousands of tiny filaments are at work, passing minerals and energy weaving unseen connections. The air above is quiet, but the ground below is alive with communication, as if the earth itself were whispering through fungal threads. This was the true realm of fungi, not the fruiting bodies we notice today after rain, not the towering experiments of prototaxites, but the quiet empires beneath. These kingdoms underground shaped the destiny of the surface world, nurturing plants, stabilizing soil, recycling the dead. They were the silent foundation upon which all terrestrial life rested. Even now, in modern forests, these kingdoms endure. Scientists call them the wood wide web, networks of fungi connecting trees, allowing them to share resources and even signals. A tree in distress may send warnings through fungal threads to its neighbors. A shaded sapling may be fed sugars by older, taller trees through this underground exchange. This is not modern innovation. It is a continuation of what began in the Paleozoic, when fungi first wove the land into community. There is deep comfort in knowing this. Beneath our feet, even as we walk unaware, lies a hidden kingdom that has been shaping life for over 400 million years. We do not see it, but it holds us all, quietly cradling ecosystems, balancing cycles, sustaining forests. The same was true in the Paleozoic. Beneath barren surfaces, fungi were building worlds. So when we picture those early landscapes, let us not see them only as sparse and empty. Let us remember the kingdoms underground, where filaments wove life together in silence. They were the unseen rulers, the hidden architects, the patient guardians of Earth's beginnings. Their empire left no monuments above ground, but their work endures in every patch of soil, in every forest, in every breath of life. The Paleozoic world was beginning to change. From mossy carpets and fungal mats, plants were growing taller, sturdier, more ambitious. By the Devonian, some had developed vascular systems, intricate plumbing that allowed them to rise above the soil, drinking water from roots and sending it upward toward fronds that stretched into the sun. Soon, primitive trees would appear, their bodies stiffened with lignin and cellulose, substances strong enough to defy wind and weather. But strength comes with a price. These woody tissues, so resilient in life, were equally resilient in death. When the first plants fell, their trunks and stems lay stubborn on the ground, resisting decay. Rainwater darkened them, floods tumbled them, but the tissues did not yield easily. Without something to break them down, the land risked becoming cluttered with the bodies of plants, their nutrients trapped, their cycles stalled. This was the moment when fungi rose again to meet the challenge. Among their many gifts, they evolved the extraordinary ability to decompose lignin and cellulose, the very building blocks of wood. With enzymes more powerful than anything seen before, they slipped into the tough walls of plant cells and pried them open, unraveling what had once seemed unbreakable. They became the first true wood breakers, unlocking the forests and ensuring their cycles could continue. Imagine walking through one of those early forests. Primitive trees, not like the ones we know today, but towering compared to the mosses before them, rise into the air. Their trunks are rigid, their branches sparse, their forms alien yet familiar. Storms pass, winds topple some of these early giants, and they crash to the forest floor with a thunderous weight. At first, they lie untouched, hulking relics of life now gone. But then slowly, almost imperceptibly, fungi creep in. Mycelium threads infiltrate the bark, seep into the wood, and begin the patient work of deconstruction. Over years, decades, centuries, the fallen giant softens. Its rigid strength collapses into spongy matter, its fibers dissolve, its nutrients seep back into the soil. Around it, new plants take root in the softened wood, feeding on the minerals released by fungal labor. Insects find shelter in the decaying trunk, amphibians crouch in the damp shadows, entire microhabitats blossom from the body of what once stood tall. Death becomes a cradle of life again, all because fungi found a way to break what seemed unbreakable. There is something profoundly cozy in this rhythm. The forests could grow because the fungi ensured they would not suffocate beneath their own weight. Every fallen tree became a gift, every ending a beginning, every collapse a chance for renewal. The fungi were not destroyers, they were recyclers, caretakers, keepers of balance. This innovation had consequences far beyond the forest floor. By unlocking lignin, fungi alter Earth's carbon cycle. The carbon once trapped in plant tissues now flowed back into the air and soil, fueling new growth, reshaping the atmosphere. For a time, in the Carboniferous, not all wood was broken down. Much of it accumulated in vast swampy forests, buried, compressed, and transformed into the coal we burn today. But fungi were already learning, already adapting, already preparing to close that loop. By the end of the Paleozoic, they would master the art of wood decay, ensuring that future forests would recycle more completely. Consider, too, the coziness of a modern forest, where fallen logs host entire gardens of moss, fungi, insects, and seedlings. That scene so rich, so full of hidden life began here. It was born in the Paleozoic, when fungi first cracked the code of wood and turned trunks into ecosystems. Today, when you see mushrooms sprouting from a log, you are witnessing a legacy hundreds of millions of years old. The woodbreakers are still at work, still continuing the cycle they began. Close your eyes and imagine sitting beside one of those early Paleozoic logs. The air is damp, the ground soft. You run your hand across the surface of the trunk, its once hard bark now spongy beneath your fingers. Tiny fungal threads lace through the wood, unseen but present, working tirelessly. Around you, plants lean toward the gap in the canopy left by the fallen tree, their fronds unfurling into the new light. Life is growing from death, hope from decay, promise from collapse. All of it sustained by the fungi, the quiet woodbreakers hidden from sight. And so the forests of Earth did not rise alone. They were accompanied, supported, and sustained by fungi who took on the hardest of tasks, to break the unbreakable, to unlock the lock, to turn wood into soil, endings into beginnings. In doing so, they ensured that forests could last, not just for years or centuries, but for eons. This was their gift to the world, not only the creation of soil, not only their partnerships with plants, but their willingness to tackle even the toughest challenges. They became the first woodbreakers, and in doing so, secured the balance of life on land. The Paleozoic world was thirsty. The land, though softened by fungal mats and mossy colonies, still carried the memory of stone and dryness. Water was life, rare in some places, fleeting in others, but always essential. And for fungi, water was not merely sustenance. It was rhythm, it was music, it was the pulse that carried their story forward. Picture a Paleozoic storm rolling across the land. Dark clouds gather, winds sweep through valleys, and the first drops of rain strike the ground. Each drop splashes against stone, soil, and moss, breaking the silence with 1,000 tiny taps. The air cools, the dust settles, and in the dampness, fungi awaken. Their hyphae swell, drinking deeply. Their spores, long waiting in stillness, stir to life. Rain was the signal, the heartbeat that fungi followed. In its presence, they flourished. Mycelial webs expanded outward, sending filaments deeper into cracks, spreading farther across the land. Spores, tiny and countless, were lifted into the air by the splash of raindrops. They rose like invisible clouds, carried by winds to new valleys, new rocks, new horizons. Each spore was a promise, a chance for fungi to find new ground, to stitch new soil, to cradle new beginnings. There is something deeply cozy in this image. Rain falling on a quiet land, feeding not only streams and rivers, but the hidden networks below. The air grows rich with the earthy fragrance of fungal compounds, the same scent we know today as petrichor. That comforting aroma, that unmistakable perfume after rain, is the breath of fungi. It drifted across the Paleozoic, just as it does across our gardens and forests now. Imagine walking across a valley after a storm. The ground is damp, soft beneath your steps. Tiny plants glisten with droplets, their fronds heavy with water. The silence is replaced by a gentle dripping, the murmur of streams swelling with runoff. And beneath your feet, mycelium stretches eagerly, weaving through the moist soil, taking advantage of the gift of rain. Above you, invisible spores drift, carried quietly on the breeze. The land is alive with renewal, every droplet a spark. Rain did more than sustain fungi, it spread them. In dry times, networks could shrink back, lying dormant in cracks and shadows. But with rain, they surged outward, connecting, feeding, transforming. In this way, the pulse of storms became the pulse of life itself, each cycle of wet and dry orchestrating the spread of fungal empires. And fungi, in turn, shaped the journey of water. Their mats and networks trapped moisture, holding it longer in the soil, preventing it from slipping too quickly back to the sea. They created small reservoirs, microclimates where plants could endure between storms. Rivers ran clearer where fungi bound their banks. Pools lingered longer where fungi thickened the soil. They were not only sustained by rain, they sustained rain's gift, extending its touch across the land. This relationship between fungi and rain continues to this day. In modern forests, fungal spores are carried aloft by storms, traveling for miles. Their compounds help seed clouds, influencing rainfall itself. Even now, fungi and rain dance together, their rhythm echoing across the earth. It is humbling to realize that this ancient partnership, begun in the Paleozoic, still pulses in the world around us. Think of the comfort this brings. Rain, so often associated with renewal, has always been tied to fungi. When we step outside after a storm and breathe in that earthy fragrance, we are sharing in a rhythm hundreds of millions of years old. The fungi remind us that storms are not only endings, they are beginnings, awakenings, pulses that keep life alive. So let us imagine once more those Paleozoic plains after rain. The sky is still heavy with clouds, the ground soft and dark, the air rich with petrichor. Tiny spores drift invisibly, promising futures unseen. Beneath the soil, fungal networks surge outward like quiet rivers, weaving the land into fertility. And through it all, there is rhythm, the rhythm of rain, the rhythm of fungi, the rhythm of a world learning to grow. The Earth's heart did not only beat in the molten core or in the crashing waves of the sea. It beats also in raindrops striking the ground, in spores rising on the breeze, in the quiet expansion of mycelium beneath the soil. This was the pulse of rain. This was the breath of fungi. Together, they kept the Paleozoic alive. Beneath the quiet of the Paleozoic land, something extraordinary was unfolding. To look across those ancient plains, you might have seen only small plants clinging to damp soil, lichens painting stone, and here and there, the towering pillars of Prototaxites. But the true marvel was not above ground. It was below, in the unseen world of fungal mycelium, where hidden highways stretched out in every direction. Imagine peeling back the thin skin of soil beneath your feet. What would appear is not empty dirt, but a living network, countless threads weaving through grains of sand and fragments of rock. These filaments, called hyphae, reached outward tirelessly, spreading for meters, even kilometers. Alone, a single thread seemed fragile, but woven together, they formed vast networks, living fabrics that stitched the land into coherence. These networks were more than roots or threads. They were highways. Through them, water moved, minerals flowed, sugars were exchanged. Fungi acted as couriers, carrying nutrients from one part of the land to another, connecting patches of life that otherwise might have remained isolated. A moss colony struggling in poor soil might receive phosphorus ferried along fungal threads from a richer patch nearby. In return, it might share sugars harvested from the sun. What one lacked, another provided, all carried across the silent highways of fungi. Think of the coziness in this picture. Life did not thrive on isolation, but on connection. These fungal networks were not only builders of soil, but mediators of community. They turned the land into something shared, linking individual plants into greater wholes. It was as though beneath the silence of the surface, a quiet conversation was happening, words not spoken aloud, but exchanged through molecules passed along threads in the dark. Picture yourself kneeling on a damp Paleozoic riverbank. To your eyes, the land is modest, small moss-like plants, a scattering of green against stone. But beneath your feet, a hidden exchange is taking place. Sugars flow downward from plant roots into fungal filaments. In return, minerals travel upward from fungi into plant tissues. Across the soil, like letters in a postal system, these gifts move silently from one partner to another. You cannot see it, but you are standing on a web of communication, an invisible city beneath the earth. This was the first wood wide web, though there were no woods yet to give it name. It was an internet of mycelium, linking the land into networks of cooperation and exchange. And though it was unseen, it reshaped everything. Plants could grow taller, spread wider, endure longer, because they were not alone. They had allies beneath them, passing what they needed, sustaining them through hardship. Even today, scientists marvel at the complexity of fungal highways. In modern forests, trees share sugars with shaded seedlings, helping them survive. Older trees, sometimes called mother trees, send resources through fungal threads to the young. Warnings of pest attacks ripple underground, carried by mycelium from one root to another. What began in the Paleozoic as simple exchanges has blossomed into one of the most intricate networks in nature. But in those early days, the magic was already present. The first plants were fragile, their roots shallow, their bodies delicate. Without fungi, they would have remained scattered colonies, struggling in isolation. With fungi, they became parts of a larger whole, connected by hidden highways that brought resilience and strength. There is something profoundly comforting in this. We often think of survival as a solitary endeavor, each life struggling on its own. But the fungi remind us that survival is also about connection, about sharing, about unseen bonds that sustain us. The hidden highways beneath the Paleozoic land whisper a lesson still true today. We are stronger together, bound by networks we may never fully see. So let us imagine once more the land of that ancient time. Above, a quiet landscape of mosses, lichens, and fungal towers. Below, a world alive with connection, highways of filaments carrying gifts across the soil, stitching the earth into a single community. No sound, no spectacle, only threads weaving life into wholeness. These hidden highways were the veins of the land, the roots of community, the lifelines of the Paleozoic earth. And though they remain unseen, they endure. Beneath every forest floor, every garden, every meadow, the highways are still there, carrying whispers of connection across the earth. The land had been bare once, a quiet canvas of stone and silence. Then lichens came, painting its surface with thin strokes of gray and green. Moss-like plants followed, their shallow roots nourished by fungal partners. Carpets spread, mats thickened, and fungal towers like Prototaxites rose over valleys. But the story was only beginning. From those humble beginnings grew something far greater, the green empires of the Paleozoic. Picture the Devonian landscape as it transformed. Along rivers and valleys, plants grew taller, reaching ever higher into the sun. Primitive trees appeared, their stems thick with vascular tissue, their bodies supported by lignin. Some towered 10, even 20 meters above the ground. Their roots dug deeper than any plant before them, spreading wide in search of stability. Beneath those roots, fungi were waiting, ready to extend their hidden networks even farther. This partnership was not new. It had begun in mosses and lichens, but now it has expanded on a grand scale. The fungi wrapped themselves around roots and slipped between their cells, offering minerals and water drawn from far horizons. In return, the plants fed them sugars spun from sunlight. Together, they built the foundations of forests. What had once been scattered colonies now became ecosystems stretching for miles. Valleys darkened with shade, riverbanks were held firm by roots, and the air grew heavy with oxygen. Imagine walking into one of these first forests. The ground beneath you is soft, dark with soil enriched by countless cycles of growth and decay. Above, the canopy is sparse by modern standards, but to Paleozoic eyes, it must have seemed immense. Tree-like plants stretch upward, their fronds unfurling into the sky. Between them, fungi thrive, some hidden below as mycelium, others rising in fruiting bodies to release spores. The air is thick with humidity, the scent of earth and petrichor mingling in the breeze. It was here in these forests that the true empire of green began. Fungi were not kings or queens of this empire, but they were its architects, its caretakers, its advisors. Without their hidden labor, the trees could not have stood so tall. Without their patient recycling, the soil would have suffocated under fallen wood. Without their underground highways, the forest could not have endured droughts or floods. The fungi worked quietly, but their influence stretched into every leaf and branch above. And the impact was not limited to the land itself. These green empires transformed the very atmosphere. As forests spread, photosynthesis surged. Carbon dioxide levels fell, oxygen levels rose. The Earth's climate shifted, its skies thickened with breathable air. Fungi were at the heart of this change. Every molecule of sugar a plant produced carried the silent contribution of fungal partners. Every breath of oxygen released into the sky was, in part, a fungal gift. The forests also created new worlds within themselves. Shade cooled the ground, streams ran clearer, and microhabitats blossomed. Insects began to explore these new niches, amphibians crawled from the water to hunt among the fronds, and fungi welcomed them all by recycling their remains and keeping the cycles turning. The empire of green was vast, but it was fungi who ensured it did not collapse beneath its own grandeur. Think of how cozy it must have felt to stand within one of those first great forests. The air is damp and cool, filtered through layers of greenery. The soil is soft beneath your feet, alive with fungal webs. The silence broken by the drip of water, the whisper of fronds, perhaps the faint scuttle of early insects. Around you, every plant, every shadow, every breath depended on fungi. You might not see them, but you would sense their presence in the richness of the soil, in the stability of the ground, in the freshness of the air. Even now, forests carry this legacy. Modern trees, from redwoods to birches, depend on fungal partnerships as much as their Paleozoic ancestors did. The green empires of today stand tall only because their roots are cradled by fungi. It is a reminder that grandeur is never built alone. Behind every towering tree is a quiet partner, working unseen, stitching the land together. The rise of green empires was one of Earth's great revolutions. It transformed the surface, reshaped the atmosphere, and prepared the stage for animals to flourish on land. But at its foundation were the fungi, the hidden workers, the silent engineers. They built the soil, nourished the roots, recycled the fallen, and connected the living. Without them, the empires could not have risen. With them, the earth became a green world. And so, the land that was once barren now bloomed. The stone that had once been silent now rang with the whisper of fronds, the rustle of leaves, the breath of forests. The fungi did not claim thrones or crowns, but they built the palace in which the empires grew. They remain there still, beneath every forest, keeping the cycle alive. The land was no longer silent. Once barren, it now hummed faintly with life. Moss-like plants spread across damp valleys, early forests stretched their fronds toward the sun, and fungal networks stitched it all together beneath the soil. Into this tapestry of green and hidden threads came new explorers, insects, small yet destined to change the course of Earth's history. Imagine crouching low along the edge of a Paleozoic forest floor. The ground is damp, blanketed by carpets of moss and lichens, dotted with patches of fungal fruiting bodies. Spores drift invisibly in the air, their delicate presence carried by the breeze. Beneath the surface, mycelium weaves its hidden highways, transporting nutrients between plants. And then, just above this miniature landscape, tiny creatures scuttle, hop, and buzz, the first insects, threading their way into a world built on fungal soil. They were small by today's standards, many no larger than a fingernail. Some resembled primitive silverfish, their bodies glistening, their movements quick and jerky. Others looked like dragonfly-like ancestors, testing the air with delicate wings. To them, the mats of fungi and moss were entire landscapes, worlds of shelter, food, and opportunity. A spore drifting from above was a feast. A fungal mat spreading across the ground was both habitat and harvest. There is something cozy in picturing these first encounters, a fungal fruiting body pushing up from the soil, releasing spores into the air, while tiny arthropods crawl along its cap, nibbling at the edges. They did not know it, but these early insects were weaving themselves into the fungal cycle, becoming carriers of spores, dispersers of life. In their movements, they helped fungi spread farther, seeding new soils, new cracks, new horizons. The partnership was not deliberate, it was born of opportunity. Insects needed food, fungi provided it. Fungi needed dispersal, insects offered it. Together they began a quiet collaboration that still endures today. Even now, beetles, flies, ants, and countless others feed on fungi, spread spores, and sustain the hidden cycles of forests. But in the Paleozoic, it was all new, the first threads of a relationship that would stretch into the deep future. Picture the world from an insect's perspective. The towering prototaxites rose like skyscrapers, the moss mats like vast plains, the soil a labyrinth of tunnels. The air was heavy with the earthy fragrance of fungi after rain. Each step revealed a feast, a spore here, a soft patch of fungal tissue there. Beneath their feet, fungal threads hummed, recycling nutrients, keeping the soil rich and the plants above alive. To the insects, the land was no longer barren. It was alive, fertile, and full of cozy corners to explore. And fungi, as always, were the quiet hosts. They offered food, shelter, and stability, even as they asked for nothing in return. Yet in the insects scuttling, in their buzzing, in their wingbeats across the moss, fungi gained what they needed most: dispersal. Their spores traveled farther, carried on legs, wings, and bodies, settling into new valleys, new cracks of stone, new patches of soil. What wind and rain began, insects continued, turning local networks into continental empires. It is comforting to imagine this exchange, not planned, not forced, but woven by the simple rhythm of life. Fungi spread spores, insects carried them. Insects found food, fungi found new ground. Together, they turned the land into a richer, more complex tapestry. The forests themselves benefited as well. With insects buzzing among their fronds, feeding on fungi, pollens, and plant tissue, Entire ecosystems gained new depth. Fungi, even the recyclers, ensured that insect remains were returned to the soil, nourishing plants, which in turn fed fungi again. A cycle was forming, intricate yet balanced, sustained in no small part by fungal networks. Think of the coziness of sitting at the base of a Paleozoic tree, watching tiny insects hop across fungal mats while spores drift in the air. The forest hums quietly, not yet with the calls of birds or mammals, but with the faint buzz of wings, the rustle of legs, the whisper of mycelium beneath your feet. It is a world both alien and familiar, alien in its forms, familiar in its rhythms. For the same dance continues today, in every forest, in every garden, where insects wander and fungi wait. The arrival of insects among the fungal mats marked another turning point in Earth's history. They were the first animals to truly thrive on land, and they did so on ground prepared by fungi. Without fungal soil, without fungal partnerships, the land might have remained too barren, too unstable, too hostile. With fungi, it became welcoming. The insects, in turn, added their own energy, helping spores spread, helping ecosystems deepen. And so the quiet partnership grew. Fungi and insects, two of the Earth's humblest forms, found one another in the Paleozoic. Together, they stitched yet another thread into the tapestry of life. Every ecosystem, no matter how ancient or modern, lives on a knife's edge. Too much growth, and the land drowns beneath its own abundance. Too little and life falters, unable to take hold. Stability is not given, it must be kept. In the Paleozoic world, as plants spread, insects scuttled, and forests began their slow ascent, fungi became the unseen guardians of balance. Picture a Paleozoic swamp in the early Devonian. Water seeps through mossy ground, trickling between roots and mats of green. Primitive trees stretch upward, their fronds reaching into pale sunlight. Spores drift through the air, carried by wind and rain. Beneath it all, fungal mycelium hums, breaking down fallen fronds, recycling nutrients, trading minerals with roots. Without this hidden labor, the swamp would suffocate, its surface piled with debris, its soil exhausted. But fungi are there, ensuring the wheel of life continues to turn. Their role was simple yet profound. They refused to let anything go to waste. A fallen plant became soil, a dead insect became nutrients. Even the smallest fragments of organic matter were taken apart, piece by piece, and returned to circulation. In their patience, fungi kept ecosystems from collapsing under their own weight. There is something deeply cozy in imagining them this way. Quiet stewards, unseen caretakers, ensuring that no part of life was squandered. To walk across a Paleozoic valley was to walk across their handiwork, soil enriched by decay, plants nourished by hidden trade, stability anchored by threads unseen. But their balance went beyond recycling. Fungi also acted as regulators of growth. By binding themselves to plants through mycorrhizal partnerships, they ensured that nutrients were not hoarded by the strong alone. A tall tree could share minerals through fungal networks with smaller plants in its shade. A patch of moss in poor soil could receive sustenance ferried from richer ground. These hidden highways, described earlier, became channels of equity. The fungi kept life balanced, distributing resources in ways that allowed diversity to flourish. Imagine crouching at the base of a Prototaxites tower, watching the forest floor around you. Tiny insects crawl across mossy mats, spores glisten on the breeze, and beneath your feet, invisible to the eye, a quiet negotiation is taking place. A plant gives sugars, a fungus offers minerals, another plant receives a share. It is a marketplace, a parliament, a community, not in sound or spectacle, but in silent flows of energy and sustenance. The fungi preside as guardians, ensuring no voice is left unheard. This guardianship extended to the cycles of carbon and oxygen that shaped the atmosphere itself. Plants, with their photosynthesis, pulled carbon dioxide from the air and released oxygen. Left unchecked, the balance could have tipped too far, cooling the earth into deep freezes. But fungi, through respiration and decomposition, returned carbon dioxide to the air, moderating the cycles, keeping equilibrium. They were not only caretakers of soil, but of sky. Even today, their legacy endures. Modern forests still depend on fungi to recycle the dead, to feed the living, to balance the flow of carbon. Our climate, our soil, our air, all are moderated by their hidden work, yet we rarely think of them. They remain, as always, the unseen guardians, quietly holding the world in balance. There is comfort in this, too, to know that for hundreds of millions of years, life has been sustained not by noise or spectacle, but by quiet persistence. The fungi remind us that balance does not need force, it needs patience. It does not need grandeur, it needs continuity. Imagine then the Paleozoic Earth without fungi. Forests would have fallen and never rotted, their remains suffocating new growth. Insects would have starved without decaying matter to recycle nutrients back into the soil. Rivers would have choked with debris, and oxygen levels might have swung wildly. Without fungi, the balance would have broken. With fungi, it was kept. So let us honor them as they deserve, not only as architects and recyclers, but as guardians of balance. They held the Paleozoic world steady, quietly ensuring that life did not falter. They continue to do so today, beneath our feet, unseen but indispensable. In every handful of soil, in every breath of forest air, in every step across the earth, their guardianship endures. Life on Earth has always sought ways to travel. Fish swam through oceans, trilobites scuttled across seabeds, plants spread their seeds along rivers. But fungi chose a different path. They entrusted their future to the wind. With spores smaller than dust, lighter than breath, they let the air carry their story forward. And in the Paleozoic world, those spores became the messengers of possibility. Picture a still morning in the Devonian. The land is quiet after a night of rain. Mosses glisten with droplets, primitive trees rise along the riverbanks, and fungal mats spread beneath them. From a fruiting body pushing up through the soil, a cloud of spores is released. They rise gently at first, lifted by the faintest breeze, their countless numbers shimmering invisibly in the morning light. Within minutes, they are carried far from their birthplace, drifting high into the air, bound for lands unseen. Each spore is tiny, a single cell encased in a shell of resilience. Alone, it is fragile, but released in numbers that could fill the air like dust motes in sunlight, their potential becomes immense. Carried by wind, they can travel miles, even cross continents. They can settle into cracks of stone, damp patches of soil, or the shaded sides of cliffs. Most will never find a home. But some will, and those few will spread their filaments outward, weaving new networks, founding new colonies, expanding the reach of fungi across the land. There is a cozy magic in this process. To stand in a Paleozoic valley and imagine spores drifting overhead is to feel the quiet persistence of life. They do not rush, they do not force. They simply float, trusting the wind, waiting for the right place to land. In that patience lies their strength. Rainstorms amplified the journey. When drops struck the ground, they catapulted spores upward, launching them into the air. Gusts of wind carried them higher still, scattering them across valleys and rivers. Even insects, newly exploring the fungal mats, became unwitting carriers, spores clinging to their bodies as they moved from patch to patch. In this way, spores spread not just locally, but globally, knitting the Paleozoic land into a fungal web. Imagine crouching near a fruiting body after a storm. The air feels thick with moisture, the scent of soil rich and earthy. If the sun catches the light just so, you might even see the faint haze of spores rising, sparkling for an instant before vanishing into the invisible currents above. Each one is a possibility, a dream carried on the breeze. Some will land close by, sprouting new mycelium within days. Others may travel for weeks, months, even years before finding soil damp enough to awaken them. This strategy was both humble and grand. Humble because it relied on chance. Grand because its scale was boundless. By sending countless spores into the air, fungi ensured that some would always succeed. Even if fire, flood, or extinction swept through a valley, spores drifting on the wind would soon return, seeding life anew. In this way, fungi became resilient, able to endure whatever shifts the Paleozoic world threw at them. And spores were not only carriers of life, they were shapers of atmosphere. Their presence in the air helped seed clouds, influencing rainfall, tying them even more closely to the cycles of water. Even today, fungal spores drift high above us, shaping weather patterns, connecting sky and soil in ways we are only beginning to understand. That quiet influence began here, in the Paleozoic, when fungi first trusted their future to the wind. Think of how cozy it feels to sit in a forest today, sunlight filtering through leaves, dust motes swirling in the air. Among those motes, invisible to the eye, spores are still drifting, as they have for hundreds of millions of years. Every breath you take carries with it the unseen legacy of fungi. Every gust of wind is a messenger, carrying whispers of life across the earth. In the Paleozoic, those spores were the vanguard of expansion. They leapt from valleys to hills, from forests to plains, from continent to continent. They made fungi one of the most widespread kingdoms of life, present in every niche, every ecosystem, every quiet corner of Earth. So let us honor them, these tiny voyagers. They are proof that greatness does not always come from size or strength. Sometimes it comes from patience, persistence, and trust in the wind. In their drifting, fungi claim the land, quietly, gently, invisibly, and in every spore released, the earth was promised renewal. The Paleozoic world had changed beyond recognition. Where once barren rocks stretched in silence, now vast forests unfurled their fronds across continents. Towering lycophytes, horsetails, and tree ferns rose into the sky, their roots digging deep into soil, their canopies shading swampy ground below. These forests were lush, damp, and almost endless, green cathedrals stretching as far as the eye could see. This was the Carboniferous, an age of abundance, an age of growth. And at the heart of it all, fungi was still there, quietly weaving their threads through every root, every fallen log, every patch of soil. But this abundance came with a puzzle. The forests grew so quickly, so vastly, that when trees fell, their trunks piled high. Their wood, rich in lignin, was resistant to decay. Fungi had begun to master the art of breaking down lignin, but in the Carboniferous, they had not yet perfected it. And so, much of the forest's bounty did not return immediately to the soil. Instead, it sank into the swampy ground, where water sealed it away from air. Layer upon layer, year after year, fallen trees were buried in silence. What could not yet be recycled became preserved, first as peat, then, under pressure of time, as coal. Imagine walking through one of these great Carboniferous swamps. The air is heavy with humidity, thick with the scent of damp earth. Above you, trunks rise like pillars, their crowns lost in mist. The ground beneath your feet is soft, spongy, littered with fallen fronds and toppled trunks. Here and there, fungi sprout in fruiting bodies, their caps glistening after rain. Beneath the surface, mycelial threads wind through the soil, recycling what they can. But beyond their reach, in waterlogged depths, massive logs lie preserved, awaiting transformation. It is cozy, in a strange way, to imagine fungi as both participants and witnesses in this process. They continued their patient work, breaking down what they could, nourishing the soil, feeding the green empire. Yet they also allowed some of the forest's bounty to slip beyond their reach, into the hidden vaults of time. What fungi could not yet consume, Earth herself tucked away, a reserve of carbon that would one day ignite in human hands, millions of years later. This interplay created the coal seams that still define landscapes today. Entire mountain ranges bear the black memory of those forests, pressed into stone. Every lump of coal carries within it the imprint of Paleozoic life, ferns, trees, mosses, all cradled by fungi that prepared the soil but could not finish the cycle. Coal is the fossilized shadow of an age when fungi and plants had not yet found their full rhythm together. Yet even as coal formed, fungi were learning, adapting. In time, new lineages would evolve enzymes capable of breaking lignin down completely, closing the loop, ensuring that future forests would not pile up endlessly but would recycle more efficiently. The Carboniferous was both a gift and a lesson, a time of abundance that built the energy reserves of the future, and a time of challenge that drove fungi to grow even stronger in their role as decomposers. Think of the comfort in this hidden continuity. Even when fungi could not yet recycle everything, they did not fail. They gave the world something else instead, the deep reserves of coal that fueled human warmth and light in later ages. And in their patient evolution, they prepared themselves for the ages to come, when their wood-breaking mastery would make ecosystems even more balanced. Imagine sitting at the edge of a Carboniferous swamp, watching the twilight settle. The forest hums with life, insects buzzing, amphibians calling, fronds whispering in the wind. Beneath your feet, fungi thread the soil, recycling endlessly, holding the system together. And deep below, unseen and silent, fallen forests are being tucked away, pressed slowly into coal. The surface world thrives, the underground world transforms, and fungi are present in both stories, the visible and the hidden, the living and the preserved. Even today, when coal burns in our fires and powers our cities, we are touching the work of fungi. They created the soil that fed the forests. They recycled what they could, and what they could not, they left behind for the earth to keep, giving us fuel that would one day shape civilizations. Cozy, in a strange and sobering way, that even in their limitations, fungi gave more than we can measure. The Carboniferous was their classroom, their proving ground. It was an age of green abundance, an age of stored energy, an age where fungi's quiet work left traces that endure in stone. These were the Coal Age connections, threads linking forests and fungi, time and energy, life and memory. And those connections remind us that even what seems unfinished can hold meaning and can carry gifts forward into the deep future. The Paleozoic had been an age of transformation. From barren rock to mossy carpets, from fungal mats to towering forests, from insects to amphibians, life had filled the land with sound and motion. Fungi had been there through it all, weaving soil, partnering with plants, recycling the dead, balancing the atmosphere. They were the hidden thread stitching every chapter together. Yet as the Paleozoic drew toward its close, the world began to shift once more. Imagine the late Permian landscape. Forests still stretched across continents, but their shadows had grown darker. Swamps drained in places where seas retreated. Vast interiors of land became dry, arid, their soils cracked beneath the sun. The once lush Carboniferous jungles thinned, replaced by hardier plants that could endure drought. Amphibians gave way to reptiles, their eggs freed from water, their scales shielding them from the heat. And beneath it all, fungi continued their quiet work, whispering life into balance, even as the balance itself began to tremble. The earth itself seemed restless. Volcanoes exhaled fire across Siberia, their eruptions filling the skies with ash and gases. Temperatures rose, oceans acidified, ecosystems strained. Insects swarmed in new numbers, reptiles grew larger, but fungi held steady, their threads threading soil, their fruiting bodies rising after storms. They had endured ice ages and droughts before. They would endure these changes too, for fungi were not bound to one form of life, one climate, one era. They thrived wherever decay existed, wherever soil needed weaving, wherever partnerships could be made. It is a cozy, humbling thought. Even as the great forests faltered, fungi whispered on. A fallen trunk in a drying swamp still hosted their threads. A reptile's carcass, abandoned under the sun, was slowly dismantled by their patient work. In the cracks of stone, spores still stirred after rain, spreading the networks farther. They did not resist change. They adapted to it, turning endings into beginnings even as the world around them grew fragile. The whispers of fungi before the end were not shouts of defiance, but songs of persistence. In their patience, they reminded the earth that no collapse is final, no silence permanent. When forests fell, fungi softened their remains into soil. When climates shifted, fungi shifted too, following life wherever it could endure. Their story was not bound to the grandeur of the Paleozoic. It was deeper, longer, stretching into every age yet to come. And so, as the Great Dying approached, the Permian-Triassic extinction, when nearly all life would falter, fungi did not vanish. In fact, evidence suggests they flourished in the aftermath. Where plants and animals perished, fungi thrived on the abundance of decay. They became once more caretakers of endings, guiding the earth gently through its darkest chapter. Their fruiting bodies may have dotted the desolate landscapes, their spores filling the air, their mycelial webs feeding on the silence, preparing the soil for rebirth. Picture the quiet of a late Permian forest as it thins beneath the heat. The canopy no longer shades as deeply, the ground grows cracked, streams run low. A tree falls, its leaves brittle, its trunk hollow. For a time it lies still. Then slowly fungi seep in, threads spreading through its heartwood, dismantling it, returning its strength to the soil. Around its base, spores drift, carried by wind, whispering the promise of continuity. Even as the world trembles, the fungi keep their rhythm. There is comfort here, even in the shadow of extinction. Fungi remind us that life's story is not erased by endings. It is rewritten. They whisper that balance can return, that soil can be renewed, that silence can become song again. They carried that whisper through the end of the Paleozoic, into the dawn of the Mesozoic, into the age of reptiles and dinosaurs. Their story did not close, it only turned a page. The Paleozoic ended with upheaval, but fungi endured with quiet persistence. Their whispers before the end were not farewells, but promises promises that life would continue, that green would return, that cycles would endure. They were the caretakers of Earth in its youth, and they remained its companions as it grew older. And so, as the Paleozoic drew to a close, the fungi whispered into the soil, into the wind, into the cracks of stone, "We will endure. We will weave again. We will hold the world steady until it heals." The Paleozoic era was an age of beginnings. It saw the seas burst with strange new life, the first steps of plants onto land, the rise of insects, amphibians, and the earliest forests. It was an age of silence giving way to song, of stone giving way to soil, of barrenness transforming into abundance. Yet woven through every moment of this story was a presence so quiet, so unassuming, that it is often forgotten. The fungi were there, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, guiding, shaping, sustaining. They were and remain the hidden architects of the earth. From the lonely shores where their hyphae first crept into cracks of stone, fungi began the patient work of transformation. They softened rock into soil, preparing the land for plants. They formed partnerships, trading minerals for sugars, making possible the rise of forests. They recycled the fallen, turning endings into beginnings, keeping ecosystems from drowning in their own remains. They spread spores on the wind, stitching the continents into one vast, interconnected web. They stood as towering giants in the form of prototaxites, monuments of what fungi could become. And they whispered their resilience even as the Paleozoic drew toward its great extinction, reminding the earth that life endures even in silence. There is a lesson in their story, a comfort in their quiet persistence. We often celebrate the loud, the grand, the dramatic, the explosions of life, the rise of towering forests, the sweep of great reptiles, but fungi remind us that the most essential work is often unseen. It is the steady labor beneath the surface, the patience of threads weaving soil, the humility of giving without demand. Their story is not one of conquest, but of care, not of noise, but of endurance. Not of spectacle, but of balance. Imagine standing in a modern forest today. The ground is soft beneath your feet, the air rich with the scent of soil after rain. Around you, trees stretch upward, insects hum, birds sing. It feels complete, alive, eternal. But beneath it all, fungi are still there, as they have always been, weaving, recycling, nourishing, whispering. Every breath of oxygen, every leaf of green, every step on soil carries their invisible touch. The Paleozoic may have ended, but fungi did not. They carried their threads into the Mesozoic, into the age of dinosaurs, into the Cenozoic, into our own time. They remain in every ecosystem, from deserts to tundras, from oceans to forests. They connect the roots of trees, cradle the growth of seedlings, and return the fallen to the cycle of life. They are still the hidden architects, the unseen foundation upon which the visible beauty of the world rests. And so, as we close this chapter of time, let us pause in gratitude. Let us honor the fungi not as background characters, but as central figures in the great story of Earth. Without them, the land would not have softened, the forests would not have risen, the air would not have filled with oxygen, and the story of life on Earth, including our own, would have been very different. There is a cozy reassurance in knowing that the quiet ones endure, that even when worlds end, when ages close, when forests fall, the fungi are there, ready to weave again. Their patience is longer than empires, their endurance deeper than stone. They are not always seen, but they are always present. So the next time you walk through a forest after rain, pause for a moment, breathe in the earthy fragrance that rises from the soil. Look at the moss on stone, the mushrooms pushing up from the ground, the soft richness beneath your feet. In that moment, you are sharing a story that began hundreds of millions of years ago on lonely Paleozoic shores. You are walking with the hidden architects, the guardians of balance, the weavers of Earth's living fabric. And in their silence, they are still whispering, we endure, we connect, we build, we cradle life.